Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you, everybody. I can't quite understand why you're not watching the sail away from this rather lovely town, but thank you very much for coming to see me. I do appreciate your presence with me this afternoon. I'm a bit of a strange character. I'm here to bring you back to reality from the fantasy life on the ship. You really should be dancing and eating again. So I'm here to give you a 3-lecture series on the world, the state of the world, in fact. You can't really accomplish that in 3 lectures, but at the very least we'll try over the course today, tomorrow morning, and then on the day at sea before Germany to cover some of the core global issues that are of concern. I might add tomorrow morning's lecture will be specifically on Europe. It'll be more of a economic scene setter as to where Europe is at right now, a little bit about the European Union and a bit about some of Europe's problems going forward. So if you don't want to hear problems, if you don't want to hear some sort of challenging issues, go to that buffet, please do. But I really hope that you will stay with me and that you will engage me at least in conversation and debate. I'm not the last word on all of these topics, I must tell you, and I'm not here to belittle or to insult anybody either. I enjoy the interaction, hopefully just as much as you do, and I hope that you'll sort of enjoy at least the input from the 3 lectures that I'm going to do. Now, in case you haven't met me or don't know where I come from, just a little bit about me. My name is Daniel Silke, not Daniel Steele, as was mentioned last night by our esteemed cruise director. I hail from Cape Town in South Africa, a rather pretty city. Those of you that have visited Cape Town will know it's rather attractive. I live in Cape Town and I work all over the world, predominantly in South Africa, but I have clients all over the world who are looking for strategic presentations on their business, on their industry, on political and economic issues. So I call myself a political economy specialist, and there's a hint of a futurist in what I do as well. So some of the material that I will present to you today just gives you an idea of many of the issues that businesses and corporates are looking at when it comes to developing their businesses into the future. There's doom and gloom for sure, but always in the doom and gloom, there is a sense of opportunity as well. And for consultants like myself, we have to flesh out, in a sense, the opportunities that exist for business in an incredibly and rapidly changing global environment. That's the challenge that I certainly work in when I come to doing my consultancy with corporates. Of course, a little quick advert. It wouldn't be fair to come on a cruise ship without a little advert for my book, Tracking the Future, of which 5 select copies have been brought onto the ship by myself, and they are available in the bookstore. You may want me to sign any of them if you wish to purchase one, but I do caution you, I suspect the book will have more value without my signature, as it happens, in future. But the book is there if you are interested in material pertaining to global trends and the future of the world. Now, let me just start by saying that, this is a talk that really spans the world, and it's rather nice to talk to you about this because you're all world travelers. You've probably been to so many of the different areas and regions of the world that I'm going to mention during the course of the next 40 minutes, and I think you will probably almost have a greater appreciation of some of these issues having visited so many parts of the world. My clients very often encompass boards, directors who travel, but very often my clients are company employees who don't travel. So it really is a pleasure for me to be on Crystal, to be invited back to share some of these thoughts and ideas with you. Now, there are 4 sort of broad characteristics, I suppose, about the world. Us analysts like to give all of these characteristics an acronym. We call them the VUCA characteristics of the world. And I think you will agree that the world is indeed in what I would call a particularly volatile era. I was discussing last night at dinner with the other wonderful lecturer on board the issue and the philosophical issue of whether we are living in a particularly volatile and difficult time. And all of us agreed that we are living in a particularly volatile time. But I suppose every era, whichever era we've been on this planet in our lives, whether we're here 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, each era or each decade has its own set of characteristics and volatility. Nevertheless, I do believe that this is a particularly volatile time for all of us in the world. It's a particularly uncertain time as well. And I'll mention some of those uncertainties as we go through the presentation. So there's volatility, there's uncertainty, there's complexity in this world like never before. And that complexity is a result of so many factors. Again, you'll see the puzzle. I mean, that's, an exaggeration of a Rubik's Cube there on the screen. But absolutely, the Rubik's Cube of the world in which we live is becoming exceptionally complex. And there are all sorts of signals that we get on a daily basis that are very ambiguous. On the one hand, things look reasonably good, and there are benefits potentially for us as human beings. On the other hand, of course, almost the same benefits contain other inherent dangers and unintended consequences that I also have to look at when dealing with some of my bigger corporate clients. So the VUCA characteristics set the scene, I suppose, for a world in 2015 and beyond that I think is going to become even more of these four characteristics. And I might add, we could add a sort of a fifth characteristics to the world, a highly competitive world. I actually think competition, and it didn't fit in nicely with the acronym, so I didn't do a slide on it, but competition and competitiveness between individuals, between countries, between regions in this world is particularly acute, and I believe will become more so. And there's nothing like a good little bit of healthy competition for everybody, I might say. It makes some people feel uneasy when there's competition around, and I'll allude to some of that competition from a geopolitical point of view in this particular talk. Now, let me just start by, and really don't take anything personally, please, in this room. I hope none of you are too emotional or feel as though I'm going to belittle anybody. What I say and some of the stuff I do, I say in jest, I must tell you. Let me start by mentioning some of these complexities, some of the aspects of this world that have made us particularly volatile over the course of the last year, 2, 3, or 5. And clearly issues in Europe, and we'll talk about Europe in much more detail tomorrow. That, by the way, is an advert for the British magazine The Spectator, for those of you from the UK. And that advert has been up in the London Underground over the last few years or so. Pretty unpleasant if you happen to be Greek to look at that advert and you're in the London Underground, or for that matter, if you're German, and to be reminded that you, by and large, have bailed out the poor old Greeks over the course of the last number of years. This, of course, has created a high degree of volatility. The volatility in Europe is not over. And of course, we will get to issues relating to Greece tomorrow and the economic indicators for Europe. But one of the core determinants of volatility, I believe, over the course of the next number of years is going to be the issue of youth unemployment. And really, when we look at societies and we look at my clients who very often are corporate clients who are trying to sell products into markets, trying to sell a product into the European market becomes quite difficult to predict the future when you're dealing with youth unemployment rates, particularly in Spain or in Portugal, of nearly 50% of young people who are out of work. And what are those 50% of people doing in terms of providing for their future? They're not able to save adequately. Many of them are involved in jobs that are beneath them because they just can't find a proper job. Their qualifications don't match any available jobs because the jobs are just not simply available out there. So issues relating to youth unemployment, I believe, is an issue we're all going to have to flag. It's not just a European issue. It applies in many developing and other parts of the world as well. Volatility is enhanced in this world, of course, by the rise of ISIS or ISIL, depending on how you like to call the particular caliphate, to use another term that we didn't really become familiar with until very, very recently. Just look at that map. That's the sort of redrawn map that exists now of Syria and Iraq, and the red blob really in the middle, which is about the size of the country of Jordan, now represents another entity altogether, an extremist informal state, because this is not a state with borders or boundaries as we know it, But the sheer size and complexity of this particular geopolitical region of the world adding to these tensions. And you've seen reports today about changes of strategy by extremists in this particular territory. I think this is going to continue to be with us and obviously continue to affect us into the future. We've just come from Russia, of course, and we've just come from that fantastic country that has gone through incredible volatility of their own, and yet it's just not over. And indeed, concerns about Russia's nationalistic ambitions into the future, her actions in Crimea in particular, and of course in Ukraine as well, and for that matter in this very region of the world that we're traveling in, the threat, that existential threat, I suppose, to the former Soviet republics here along the Baltic, continue to be a part of the volatility that we'll see into the future. I particularly like this cover. I'm not so fond necessarily of the agreement that was signed with the United States and Iran, but I do love the cover of The Economist magazine. This is an issue that I think will create added complexity in the world. On the one hand, we are trying to bring in the Iranians into the family of nations, and I'm all for bringing everybody into the family of nations and making people feel that bit more welcome rather than keeping them on the periphery. But of course, the unintended consequences, the ambiguity of this particular issue really can mean interstate conflict rising, particularly in the Middle East. It can lead, I suppose, to a new arms race as the skeptical Saudis react to a stronger and wealthier Iran as a result of the dropping of economic sanctions. So again, we've had an ambiguous deal that has been done when it comes to welcoming Iran and at least policing their nuclear program. On the one hand, it looks as though they're going to be brought into the family of nations. On the other hand, the unintended consequences could be quite dramatic and quite severe. So, I mean, really talk about complex and ambiguous foreign policy, to put it mildly. We've had a remarkable year over the course, the last 12, 18 months or so, with the drop in the price of oil. Well, we should all be rejoicing that this price of oil has dropped so dramatically by at least half, if not more. And most of those involved in energy predictions into the future really don't predict the price of oil going back anywhere near to the high points in the 08-09 period. And for all of the various options that there are, it looks as though even those who are pessimistic about the price of oil remaining as low as it is currently are predicting a price into the future of no more than $100 a barrel, well below the peaks of $140 or $125 per barrel. Now, that's good news. It's good news for economics, good news for business all over the world. It's good news, of course, essentially for the United States, who's become self-sufficient in oil, and that, of course, will boost the U.S. economy into the future. Very important and positive aspect of what the U.S. has been able to accomplish in terms of its own energy provision. But for many countries across the world, they need a decent oil price or a high oil price in order to balance their books. And you know, we could do just a talk just purely on the countries that I put up on the screen. On a country like Nigeria that needs oil to be $123 per barrel in order to balance its own budget. The oil price is now barely $60 a barrel. Look at the risk to Nigeria, the risk to Venezuela, and you're seeing it playing itself out in Venezuela right now. And look at Russia. Since we've just been in Russia, Russia needs the oil price per barrel at $105 in order to balance her books, let alone the effect of sanctions on the Russian economy. So you can see that the positives, again, of a lower oil price has a risky, a detrimental potential effect on so many of these countries in the world. We're also seeing the normalization of the United States economy after the financial crash of the end of the 2007-2008 period. And this normalization, the normalization of interest rates that in a sense is a positive, certainly for the US economy, has a knock-on effect globally. Capital in the United States, which was looking for a good rate of return, left the United States in the 2008, 9, 10 period following low interest rates there to seek a higher rate of return in the developing world. Now that the Fed looks as though interest rates will start to rise in the course of the next few months and into next year, capital may well return back to the United States, affecting developing markets. So again, on the one hand, the normalization of the financial sphere in the United States is positive. For those living in developing markets across the world, a stronger US economy means that capital and cash is perhaps more likely to stay at home rather than be more adventurous in seeking a higher rate of return elsewhere. And of course, when you're looking for volatility and you're looking for excitement in the world, you have Donald Trump. Need I say more? Now, I'm a big picture kind of guy. I like big trends. And I'm just going to give you a few big trends that I think are interesting and I think are very relevant for all of us. Whilst you are sitting here with me, right, just listening to this presentation, and if you stay to hear the next presentation, the same features are going to occur in the next hour that you sit with your next presenter right here. Whilst you are here with me, about 500 babies are born in the United States. Approximately every 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, about 450 to 500 babies are born in the United States. But in China, about 2,000 babies are born. During the period that you just hear with me, 2,000 babies are going to be born in China. And if you think that's a lot, my friends, go to one of my favorite countries anywhere, India, where 3,000 babies are going to be born, just whilst you are sitting here listening to me. Now, I could just stop the talk, let you sort of consider the implications, and you all can consider the implications for this going forward. Dramatic demographic shifts are taking place across this planet. And those demographic shifts are already being felt in economic outcomes. In the course of the next year or so, nearly 90% of the world's population are going to live in what we call emerging markets. Look, I still regard China as an emerging market. Some might argue that it has already emerged, but for the purposes of these talks, let's refer to China as an emerging market. India, an emerging market, but rapidly emerging as well. So 90% of the world's population in these big emerging markets. We should say re-emerging markets, because you must remember that prior to the Industrial Revolution in Europe in the mid-1800s, China and India were already the world's dominant economies. We're just seeing a return, a sort of a back to the future scenario within the world as China and India resume their importance in global economics. Again, over the course of the next year or so, 2/3 of all global gross domestic product will occur in these emerging markets. So, again, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that the pendulum of power, economic power, to a degree political power, and possibly even military power in future, is starting to swing. It's starting to swing from the Western world and the role that the West have played, particularly since the end of the Second World War, to, of course, a whole host of nations, including these emerging market players. And the best way to describe this, and you've all been there, I'm pretty sure, so I'm not going to ask you how many people in this audience have been to Shanghai, but I just love showing the contrast of the Shanghai skyline to you over a period of 20 years. There's the Pudong in Shanghai in 1990, nothing much in the Pudong there, as you can see, and 20 years later, that's the same view. That's the same view of Shanghai, and I think it just sort of epitomizes or symbolizes a changing perspective on the world. Now, again, I come from South Africa, so my emotional view of this perhaps is different to an American sitting here in this room, to be perfectly honest. I see this as a tremendous opportunity for global growth. I can understand for some who might see this as a potential issue of concern into the future. So I appreciate and respect from where you all come. Most economic data now shows that China's economy is likely to overtake that of the United States to be the world's largest economy. That's the largest economy in terms of output. Doesn't mean to say that the Chinese will be the wealthiest in the world, But certainly, their economy is likely to be the largest, and that could occur any time over the course of the next 3 to 5 years or so. It's quite difficult to get accurate statistics on this particular issue, I must tell you, but the best case shows that this important pendulum shift and swing in the world is almost upon us. And you know, again, it's quite something for us to see this change and to live through this particular change in the world. So, you know, we sort of, analysts always like to sort of pontificate as to, does this mean that there are shifting tides in terms of who's going to be the predominant power in the world? Who's going to be the boss, I suppose? Do we need a boss? I don't know. But those who've been used to having a position of power in the world will now, in a sense, have to be used to also additional rising powers in other parts of the world. We've just come from good old Mother Russia, where no doubt the boss of Mother Russia believes that he too has a role to play as an aspiring boss, if not only of his own country, of perhaps even a larger swathe of territory. So there is going to be competition for power going forward, and the competitiveness that I'm going to talk about in business shortly is already playing itself out politically. It's very competitive out there. We are moving into an era in the world in which I would humbly argue that there won't be the same nature of political power that we've had before. We're almost moving into a no one's world. That post-Second World War safety valve of the West in control looks as though it's going to be threatened in some form or other over the course of our lifetime. And it is, of course, for concern. It's cause for great opportunity, and perhaps for those like myself who like to look at the bigger picture, it's good to welcome everybody into the global family of nations. I was fascinated. I've just come back from a trip in Zambia. Zambia is a small country in the southern part of Africa, and I landed in Lusaka in Zambia. I was there 2 weeks ago today, I must tell you. And coming out of the airport in Lusaka, this is the billboard that greeted me as I came out of the airport. And what are they advertising in Lusaka, Zambia? The Chinese, the Bank of China, is advertising the Chinese currency. They're advertising the Chinese currency. And they are encouraging those in Zambia to begin to trade and to hold Chinese currency. It's quite a fascinating about turn that we're seeing. We see this in much of Africa, where the Chinese have been very, very active in terms of business connections in Africa. This billboard, I might add, is not just an African billboard. It's used by the Bank of China, also in other parts of the world as well. But it symbolizes, I just looked at this and I thought, well, I better stop and take a picture of this. It just symbolizes, even when we talk about the future of the US dollar, the competition that we're now going to get in future from China, who are promoting their own currency. I haven't seen the United States promote the US dollar in a billboard across the world, but I've certainly seen the Chinese do it only 2 weeks ago. It was fascinating. And I talk about this stuff, and you know, when I see something like that, and I see it in front of my eyes, that, well, firstly, I'm not necessarily pleased by it, but it certainly boosts my own theory that this world is changing and changing very, very rapidly indeed. In the third talk that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be talking about the change in the world from a political point of view and the importance of new groupings in the world. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about the European Union, but all of you are aware that there's another group in the world, the group called the BRICS group of nations, known as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and my home country, South Africa. And here are 5 important countries in their own geographical areas who have formed a loose economic alliance which has substantial political overtones into the future. This is a change, and this will challenge many of the existing Western institutions into the future, and I'll talk more about that in the third lecture. But it does indicate an important shift, and I'll tell you what this means and what the BRICS alignment means, and we can decide whether this has any relevance at all or whether it's just a rather nice opportunity for bureaucrats to travel across the world and enjoy themselves, as is always the case. So look, the politics is changing, and I think you get the message. Socially, as human beings, we are also changing and adapting. We're getting older. I say this in jest, but it's going to be pretty good news for the cruise industry. I must tell you, that's why they're building ships right now, because the world's getting older. And it's going to have profound implications on absolutely everything that we do, on insurance policies, on pension schemes into the future. We're going to live to at least 100, I would expect. If we can survive the next 10 or 15 years of the advancement in medical science, which we're seeing at a very rapid pace, I would expect that by 2030 or so, your life expectancy should be around 100 on this planet. And that's remarkable for all of us. I think it's terrific, as long, of course, as you remain cruising and enjoy your lifestyle. Now, the best way, I think, to describe to you the effects, and this is the geopolitical effects of an aging population around the world, is to have a look at how the world map is changing. And I just want to show you in this particular map, and this is one of my favorite maps. I love maps. In fact, I like maps so much. I married an Atlas. My wife's maiden name was Atlas, and I married her. This is the world's population, a snapshot picture of the world in 1960. And you can just see in 1960, obviously China pretty populous, India very populous, Japan populous. These countries are fat. They're out of proportion because of the amount of people living in these areas. Europe, a lot of people living in Europe. Africa, rather scrawny. Not that many people living on the African continent. Now, I'm going to fast forward the picture. Watch carefully. I'm going to fast forward the picture to 2050. And just note the change of where populations are going to be. I'm fast forwarding now to 2050. Let's just go back. Watch Europe in particular. Watch Europe and watch Africa. Europe, 1960, Africa, 1960. That European population shrinking and shrinking dramatically over the course of the 100 years or so of this projection, and Africa's population dramatically rising. India also dramatically rising, and China remaining pretty consistent in terms of numbers. It gives you an indication of where young people are going to be, and it gives you an indication of where aging populations are going to be, in particular on this continent that we're on right now. And you can just see in this depiction, that's the depiction of Russia, that thin little strip up there on the top, indicating, I mean, we talk about a country that has a real long-term problem other than politics and nationalism. It's demographics. It's a lack of young people. And Russia, in fact, one of the countries that really will have a lack of young people into the future. Age, of course, is becoming relevant across the world. In the next 10 years or so, there'll be 1 million voters over the age of 90 in Italy. 1 million voters over the age of 90? There's going to be great scope for political parties that appeal to this particular demographic. It's not just about young people anymore. It's going to be about the interests of that particular group of people. Look at that particular headline from CNBC. It's a shocking headline. It's not a joke, my friend, not a joke. Adult diapers will soon outsell baby nappies in Japan. Japan, one of the world's most aging populations on this particular planet. Profound implications for economics into the future. And the real issue that we look at, and when we look at countries across the world and where to invest into the future, and we look at sort of issues relating to risk and stability into the future, which countries are really going to be more stable. Take a look at this graph. It's a little complex. I'm going to show you more graphs tomorrow morning because I thought in the morning you'll be fresher than this afternoon. So I've kept the graphs to a minimum here, I must tell you. But I just want to show you it's an important graph because this plots the United States, Japan, France, Russia, Germany, the UK, and Italy. It plots the amount of workers to the amount of retirees in each of these particular societies. And back in 1990, 25 years ago, there were about 5, on average, 5 workers to every retiree in all of these various countries. But by 2050, there will be on average only about 2 workers to every single retiree. And this is a function of an aging population, an aging demographic, and of course, people who are living much longer as a result. And Russia, of course, and you'll see that's Russia's decline there in terms of that worker retiree ratio there. The United States just doing only a little bit better as it happens than Russia. And you can just see Italy, as I've indicated, the bottom of the pile there. So these are implications for the future. When we look at markets and where to invest in into the future, well, your product category for, of course, an aging population is different to a youth-oriented population. The services necessary are different, and that's what my clients are looking at when we come to looking where to invest. I spoke a little bit about Africa. Africa is going to have young people. Now, and a lot of young people at that. 10, 15 years ago, Africa was regarded as something of a basket case as a continent, I must tell you. The Economist magazine referred to Africa as the hopeless continent, they said. And then 10 years later, they ran another cover story about Africa, and they referred to Africa as Africa rising, from hopeless to rising over the course of the 10 years. Now, marketers and my clients like Africa, and they like Africa because they're young people, because populations are expanding very, very rapidly. They do not see a rapid expansion of population as something negative. They see it as a market for goods and services. And I must say, I agree with my clients on that. I also see big population increases as a market for goods and services. Africa has 1.2 billion people currently. By 2050, the continent will have 2.4 billion people. And by 2100, and maybe we will all still be living by 2100, the continent will have 4 billion people. It's huge. It's huge. The implications, again, are huge for business, and it is a future trend that all of us look at, in particular those of us looking to serve the African market. That market in Africa is urbanizing at a very rapid rate. Please don't complain about your traffic in any of your home countries. My friends, you need a good trip to Lagos in Nigeria, where this picture was taken, just to give you some perspective on life. But Africans are going to be plentiful in number, and they're going to be plentiful in urban areas. There's a big challenge. Generally speaking, when we look at economic data, and we look at some of the projections coming forward right now, the good news, now for those of you thinking here, gosh, all these people, what are we going to do? It's going to be a disaster. The good news, in fact, is that poverty levels are dropping across the world. Those living on less than $1.25 per day are dropping dramatically. So more and more people are living with that little bit more disposable income across the developing world in particular. And just to show you a complex graph, which we don't have to dwell on too long, the point I just want to make to you in terms of the future trends and the customers that I serve, they want to see where will the future consuming class be? Where will people buy products and services? Are they going to buy products and services in the West, in Russia, in Estonia, in the UK, in the US? Or are the Nigerians going to be the ones to buy goods and services into the future? And McKinsey's projections only over the course of the next 10 years or so show that emerging markets are going to be the real value driver for consumer goods into the future. Those looking at China, if any of you here who were involved in the aerospace industry, look at the figures coming out from China. China, one brand new aeroplane will take to China's skies every other day for the next 2 decades. Isn't that remarkable? If you're selling Boeing or Airbus, which is the market that you want to be in? You want to be in that particular market. We all look to see what's happening in the US economy, and we all want to see where to invest. And whilst the US economy has shown, I'm pleased to say, very, very favorable green shoots, one of the issues that we look at when looking and advising our business partners is who's going to have cash in future. Now, the big numbers are going to come out of Africa and Asia, Latin America as well, but there won't be sufficient big numbers to invest in the United States if this particular trend line that represents US wage growth, that wage growth in the United States, lackluster to put it mildly. So US consumers, yes, there's an uptick in consumer demand in the United States, but for my corporates who are looking for a positive return on investment, they've got to look elsewhere. They've got to look to put their money into emerging markets to take advantage of these millions of young people who are coming on stream. Walmart, for example, many of you familiar with Walmart, have recently invested in my home country, South Africa. They bought a big company called Game, which looks a little bit like a Walmart store. Walmart know that they're going to have to find and attract this new African consumer out there. All of these companies know that they have to move beyond the Western world to look for new consumers in the developing market. I show this picture, and I don't really want to dwell on South Africa here, but it just is a good example. Some of you might be familiar with that very fine dining experience, Burger King. Some of you might prefer to go to Burger King now and again. I have to say I do quite like Burger Kings. And I was very excited. Burger King came to South Africa. Only 2 years ago, Burger King came to South Africa. We'd never had a Burger King store in our country before. Why? Because Burger King wanted to expand to developing markets. And there is the Whopper arriving at Cape Town Airport. By the way, what's interesting about Burger King in South Africa were the lines. Look at the lines of people who lined up for that Burger King product. You might say, are people crazy to line up for a Burger King product? Well, maybe we are in South Africa. These lines stretched round the block, and I tell you, for months and months, the novelty didn't wear off of Burger King. The same could be said for Porsche, the great German car. That's the Porsche showroom in Lagos in Nigeria. Porsche tell me one of their most successful rollouts of a new Porsche showroom anywhere in the developing world has been in Lagos, Nigeria. Remarkable, because not only people can afford to buy these expensive cars, but frankly, where they're going to drive that Porsche car. Those are the roads in Lagos and Nigeria. I'm not quite sure how you get full value for your money from that beautiful vehicle, but clearly it's in demand. So the demand patterns are changing in this world. More mature, older people are going to demand different products. Women are coming on stream like never before. Women are the largest emerging market on this planet. We talk about China and India, but what about the women, the female market in particular? And products for women are going to be, I think, hot sellers into the future. Women are becoming much more economically active in countries across the world. In the next 10 years or so, 1 billion women will become economically active, prevented in the past because of religion, because of cultural norms, because they didn't necessarily have to work. In the new world of work, access to education, to information, is bringing women into the global economy like never before. Us futurists also like to look to see where people are going to live, and they're going to live in cities. Crystal didn't give me a budget to provide you with a gift today for the first person to answer, do you know the name of this particular city? Anybody want to guess the name of the city? But if you come from the city, please don't guess it. Well, I must tell you, this is a city, some of you might have been to this particular city on this particular cruise. This is a city in China, often referred to as the biggest city that you have never heard of. It's the city of Chongqing. You got holiday homes in Chongqing? I hope you have, because this is an amazing city. The greater area of Chongqing has 30 million people. 30 million people live in the city. Many of us, particularly I might add in the West, have certainly not heard of this particular city. And there are other cities like this, new emerging cities that are going to be the drivers of economic energy into the future. This urbanization that's taking place across this planet also creates an interest for my clients. They want to know which cities have got the right demographic in which to invest and promote their particular products. Every year, 65 million people across this planet are added to the world's urban population. That's the equivalent of 7 cities the size of Chicago added every year. It's the most dramatic urbanization in human history everywhere. So these are great opportunities, but they come, of course, with threats as well. The environment is strained, to put it mildly. And if you think I'm all kind of rah-rah and, this is a wonderful world, look, there are risks involved. Water is going to become, I think, one of the hot topics globally into the future. We've spoken about oil. We've grown up in an oil-related environment. I think from now, oil, yes, it'll bubble under the surface, but there are alternatives to oil coming forward. Water is perhaps going to be the next oil. Water use is growing at twice the pace of all of this population growth that I've spoken about. And in the next 10 years or so, millions of people, nearly 2/3 of the world's population, are going to live in areas of this world that have relatively scarce water supply. So water could be a driver for migration into the future, for business to choose one area rather than another area to invest in. Water could be the cause of wars, just a little bit like oil for that matter, over the course of the last number of years. Watch out for it. I think water and oil, and while I'm on the issue of sort of sustainability and the environment, one issue that I'm not going to cover in any depth, but I just wanted to put one slide into this presentation, is on the issue of climate change and the vulnerability that so many countries in this world have to climate change. Water shortages, rising temperatures, and in particular, the vulnerability is going to be felt by big population countries, China and India and parts of Africa as well. So getting governments to act on this particular issue, very, very tough, and there are certainly areas that we will flag for the future. So I think that we're in an era of immense disruption. The geopolitical factors I've spoken about, economic factors I've spoken about briefly, some social factors I've spoken about. There are a whole host of other factors that are influenced by technology and the great disruptors that we've seen over the course of the last 10, 15 years or so. All of these guys have disrupted everything that we've done, and I happen to like them all, generally speaking, and I look at them all every day, and I couldn't run my life without any of these guys. I love all this kind of disruption. That's the disruption of the last 10 or 15 years. It's marvelous. Google's disrupted the way we look for information. If any of you are in the encyclopedia business, I'm sorry for you. But Google now gives me the material that I seek on a daily basis. The world is becoming a mobile world. 5 billion cell phone users at least on this planet right now. 5 billion. It's all about mobile and will be even more so into the future. These millennials, what they call digital millennials, are the ones who are going to drive a lot of business into the future. And those digital millennials are to be found in countries all across the world. But look at that figure from China, 642 million internet users in China. That's nearly double the population of the United States, just online in China. Quite remarkable. And the projections, I must tell you, for online shopping coming out of China are fantastic if you're in that business. The Chinese are expected to spend on online shopping to a degree that by next year, Chinese online shopping could be worth more than Switzerland's entire GDP. Well, you've got 640 million people purchasing stuff. No wonder. And look at these new disruptors. So we had the Googles and the YouTubes and the Amazons and the whole host of new disruptors out there. And these guys are attacking every industry. Any of you run the taxi business? Any of you in taxis and transportation? Well, you know, there's a company called Uber. How many of you have used Uber in this room before? A few of you have used Uber. Listen, if you're in taxis, you don't want to hear the four-letter word Uber. But Uber is changing transportation across the world. It's the world's largest taxi company, and it owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, has no content. You create Facebook. You create the value from Facebook. Alibaba, that great Chinese internet retailer, it's the most valuable internet retailer, I might add. It's got no inventory at all. And Airbnb, and I've been doing a lot of work in the hospitality industry in the last while. Airbnb is the world's largest accommodation provider. It's not Sheraton or Hilton or Marriott anymore. It's Airbnb, for goodness sake. And those hotel groups are worried about Airbnb. Anybody stayed in Airbnb? One or two people here. That's changing and disrupting these traditional industries. And by the way, I just saw this headline only in the last 2 days. I mean, look at that headline. Isn't that a state of the world that we're in right now? Uber is now worth 5 times that of the Greek banks. How's that for a change in the world right now? And look at this change. Companies have come and companies have gone. Companies that didn't keep up with the digital age, like Kodak for that matter. Newsweek, you can't buy a print edition of Newsweek anymore. You're lucky if you can find it online. That was the last print edition. I love the cover. It symbolizes the change in the world. Hashtag last print issue. I get very excited about these changes. And everything is going to change. My clients in retail want to know what kind of bricks and mortar stores are going to be used in future. Will there be bricks and mortar stores, or will everything just go online? I think there'll still be bricks and mortars, but look how even retailing is changing. This is in Seoul in South Korea. This is a lady who's doing her morning shopping. But what is she doing? This isn't stock. There's no physical product here on the screen. That's an LCD readout screen. She is scanning the barcode there of a picture of the particular soy sauce item that she wants to buy. And as you can see, I think more clearly here, you can see the display unit is simply a cube of images of detergents and all the rest of it. She'll scan it into her phone and her goods will be delivered later that evening when she comes home. That's a change. We're going to see the development and mutation of traditional retail as well. Finally, there's even more change coming. Cost reductions are the order of the day, and as we develop more robotics, robo-sourcing, call it what you will, these guys are going to be taking jobs. They're going to be taking jobs in many, many different respects, I must tell you. They already do. In agriculture, we know you need fewer workers to harvest. And very often in parts of the world where workers themselves are not sufficiently competitive, farmers, of course, are mechanizing at a dramatic rate. In hotels, even, we are seeing the introduction of robot receptionists. It's coming, my friend. This is in Nagasaki in Japan. Here are robot receptionists who always will smile no matter what. They will always smile. And far be it from me to promote competition to crystal cruises, but here you go. Quantum of the Seas, there's no more friendly barman on the Quantum of the Seas. That Royal Caribbean large ship, as you can see, the robot barman will now mix your drinks perfectly for you. Look at the change that's coming. And the big change, and it's an issue of concern to me, I don't want to be sort of glib about it, is in the issue of production, of the manufacturing of goods. That's a pair of shoes, used to be made in the US, then it moved to Vietnam or Bangladesh, wherever labor was cheaper. In future, this pair of shoes is going to be made in your own home, in that little 3D printing device that will look just like a microwave oven that will sit in your office next to your printer or your computer. And when these items are made in your own home, it means job losses. And it means a continuation of unemployment. I don't think we as human beings have got our heads around this issue of the digitization of manufacturing that may well be a feature of our life in the very near future. So, my friends, I've hopefully given you some food for thought. I'm very pleased that you'll get some liquor now at dinner time to get you through the next day until my next talk tomorrow. I think there's tremendous uncertainty ahead. But again, I want to stress to you that when I do these presentations and I look at each individual issue for my clients, this is all about finding opportunity in this change. And in the corporate world, that's what it's about. Opportunity. And I believe that amidst all of this change and uncertainty, there is huge opportunity. Getting your head around it is probably the main issue. Thanks very much for listening to me. I'll see you tomorrow.